Okay, so what I'm showing you today is how to build a custom glove box radio mount for your car, your classic car. One of the things that we've had from our customers is a lot of questions or requests to build custom radio mounts for their vehicles, possibly vehicles that aren't that popular or vehicles that we don't have access to or we don't own. When they ask us for something like that, it's pretty cost prohibitive for us to make just a one-off piece. So in this case, we've built a single DIN blank that's 9.5 by 14.5 with an exact single DIN hole cut in it. So the hardest part about making your own, if you're going to make one at home, is actually getting the single DIN hole cut correctly. That hole is an exact size. Like I said, a single DIN, that's the unit of measurement they use for an aftermarket stereo. The cage that you put into these holes only has a couple millimeter thick lip all around the edge of it, and that can be pretty hard to hit if you're using a cutoff wheel or a plasma torch or whatever you'd have to use to cut this hole. So in this case, this hole is cut to within a few thousandths of an inch, actually 3/1000ths of an inch. So and then the whole thing is powder coated with a textured black. That way, when you start doing all your cutting, you can actually just do a quick spray of it. You use a satin black and it'll actually cover itself up really well with that texture. Or you can wipe it down. A lot of times this textured black's really hard to scratch. Some of the things about this this plate is that it is a 16 gauge plate. That makes it a little bit easier for you to cut at home. You can use a cutoff wheel is what I'd recommend. But if you go to Lowe's or Menards, something like that, typically the tin snips, the aviation snips, whatever you want to call them, can cut up to 16 gauge. So you can use one of those on this. You may have a little bit of deformation in some of your lines, but you can always straighten that out yourself. So let me get right to it. So the first thing that I did, the first thing you'll have to do, or at least how I recommend you do it, is to cut out a piece of cardboard that's the same size as a single DIN mount. So we're going to use this as our template. We'll be making the radio mount in the car out of this piece of cardboard, and then transferring all those measurements onto this single DIN plate, and then making our cuts. So I'll move on to showing you how to get the measurements for this. Okay, so one of the first things you want to do is to check the width, the overall width of your glove box. This glove box is well over the 9.5 inches that the DIN plate is, so we won't have to worry about trimming out any width off of our plate. The second thing that you want to do is to get a height measurement. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. I'm sure you can come up with something creative, but I just use a triangle here on the top so that I know it's nice and flat. I can tell this is a little over 4. I'm going to call it 4 1/4. And then the next thing you want to get is the offset between the top and the bottom screw hole. These aren't directly in line with each other, so they're actually offset a little bit. You got to figure out what that gap is. So I don't have a good way to do it on this one because it's such a small spot. So what I'm going to do is you could put a level on this, but I'm just going to say this looks like about flat to me, and I'll measure from one edge. I'll measure from one edge to the other. And that looks like just about 2 1/4, 2.5 inch difference from the top to the bottom. So I'll transfer that onto the cardboard, and then we'll come back and we'll put it in, and then we'll just poke the holes in where the holes go. Okay, so I've cut down a piece of cardboard, transferred it here. Now I'm just gonna put it in here and see, make sure, double check that I got everything correct. Come on. There we go. Okay, so that's essentially what this is going to look like. We'll have to do a cutout in the top for the latch. The nice thing about this actually is this is a lot smaller than your typical glove box. You could probably leave your actual glove box insert in here, or you could even move this off to one side and still use, you know, half of your glove box for storage. So next thing I'll do is I'll get a measurement of this to cut out. I'll make it a little bit extra wide. That way, in case I miss a measurement somewhere, I'm not stuck with that. So I can grab a measurement on that real quick. Looks like from relief to relief, we got just over 4 inches. As far as depth, let's see, I'm just going to make it maybe a little over 2 inches there. That's not too important as long as it's big enough. So I'll transfer that into the box and then see if it fits. Okay, so I made the relief for the latch for the glove box door. Let's test to see how it fits. Okay, looks just about perfect. So I'm going to wait to transfer the holes until I have it actually fabricated in metal. That way it'll sit in here a little more evenly. I won't have to be fighting with the cardboard as it moves back and forth and doesn't hold 90-degree angles. So I'm going to transfer this onto the metal and then cut it out, and then we'll see how everything fits. Okay, so what I did was I transferred all of my measurements from our cardboard piece here onto our DIN plate. The very first thing I did was I found the center of our DIN plate. So this is a 14.5-inch long plate, so I put a mark here at 7 1/4, and that's where I took all my measurements from. That way I knew that this DIN mark would be in the very center of this plate. And then I transferred all these with pencil onto, it transfers very well onto the black powder coat. But what you'll notice is if you use a grinder like I'm going to be using, so I've got this cutoff wheel, I'll be using that to make my initial cuts. It'll actually erase that pencil as you go. So what I also did is I took an awl or a scribe, and I also scribed these lines. You don't need to do that for these other lines because these will actually be something that you'll be able to see inside the car, so you don't generally want to do that. But so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the cutoff wheel. I'll cut this out, and then I'll show you how to bend this if you don't have a box and pan brake handy, which most of us, I would say, don't have one in our garage. So I'll show you how to bend that. So stick around. Okay, so I've used my angle grinder, and I've managed to cut all these. You can see I kind of screwed it up a little bit on this side. I also took a grinder and I went around the edges and removed all the burrs. Still got one good side on here that's got good powder coat, except for a scratch from when I sucked it into my grinder, but I can touch that up real easily with some satin black rattle can spray. So what we're going to do now is we need to make these bends. So if you don't have a brake or a sheet metal bender or anything like that at your house, you're going to need to use some other type of method. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to clamp this down on the edge of the bench and use the edge of the bench as an angle for us to bend against. So one thing that's going to happen that's probably going to alarm you would be that when you do bend this radius, the powder coat itself on the outer edge, where the radius, the long side of the radius, that powder coat is going to separate. It'll break. It'll become brittle on this side. But the side that's usable on the inside of the curve, that should just compress it a little bit, the powder coat, and it shouldn't shatter. But if it does, you're going to have to clear it off and then spray it again. But yeah, this powder coat, it should be pretty hardy on this side. But to prevent it from getting too ugly, what I did was I took and I cut with a razor blade through the powder coat on the side that it's going to break on. That way it doesn't get too ugly. At least that's the hope. It's the first time I've actually tried that, so I guess we'll see what happens. But first thing you want to do is you want to line this up with the edge of your workbench, like so. Take another piece of wood. This is another piece of the workbench, an old piece from when I was originally putting it together, and put it right on the line, right where you want this to be bent. And you just take some normal wood clamps and clamp this down nice and tight. Any movement in this is going to cause your line to distort, and you won't have a good bend there. So make sure you get this really tight, right where you want it. This is you get one chance to do this before it's screwed up. So make sure you get this part right. Oops. So there's a couple ways to bend this now. So it's definitely going to bend on the edge where my bench is. There's more than one way to do this. So one way I like to do is I like to actually hit this with a mallet. Another way to do it, we take 2 clamps and bend it down. If you do that, you're actually going to cause some scratches and some mars into the powder coat. If it's already marred up, I guess it doesn't really matter. You can also clamp this into a vise and bend it over. Lots of other ways to do that. So I'm going to double check and make sure I have everything right here. I'm going to make sure the video is good. That way, once I start hammering on this, I don't have to go back and do it again. So, okay, I double checked everything. Everything looked like it was good. So I'm going to start hammering on this. I'm actually using a small mallet here. That's how I prefer to do it. If you use a mallet, it doesn't cause any dents into your material here. So that's just my method for use. So I'm going to start on that now. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so that's my first bend. It's not quite 90 degrees. I'm going to have to readjust and then hammer at it a little bit more. But as you can see, this powder coat did separate here just like I thought. I did make that razor cut so it's a little more even, but it's still pretty ugly. But it is on the back side, so it's not something you'd ever see. I'd spray just to keep it from ever corroding. But now I'm going to flip it around and do the other side, and then we'll continue the video. Okay, so here we have it. This is the finished piece after I bent it all up. Now we're just going to test fit it into here and then mark the holes, cut the holes, and then we should be ready to do a final install. So let's just see how it fits in here. There it is. So that's what it's going to look like, final product. Where's my pencil at? Here we go. You can also measure these out if you really want. Up to you. I'll go cut these out and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I drilled the holes, I mounted it up, just put some screws in it here. These screws don't have any nuts behind them. This is just for demonstration purposes. But you can see that it fit right in there. This is generally what it's going to look like. It's up to you how well it fits, on how tight it is. Depends on how good of a fabricator you ended up being. But so it's going to become abundantly clear as soon as you start to install your stereo why you had to have an exact size hole in there. This is the cage your stereo comes with. As you can see, the lip on this is only a few millimeters. It's very small, so that's the only room for error that you have when you're cutting that hole if you decide to do it yourself. In this case, it should slide right in there. And then you'll bend tabs over on each end so that it holds tight, and then you slide your stereo in there, and that's basically what it's going to look like. So I'll bend some of the tabs over here real quick and see if I can't install my stereo quickly. course, you would probably take more time doing this than I am. I'm sure it would look a lot prettier. Also, if this was going to be a permanent installation of this vehicle, I would have resprayed with some satin black this this mount here, so that it matched nice. I would have taken off any chipped powder coat, but yeah, generally it actually looks pretty decent the way it is. But I would have sprayed it. And our stereo just should slide right in. It looks like it's a little loose. Like I said, I haven't installed any of the nuts or anything, or the washers behind the screws, so it's just kind of sat in there for demonstration purposes. And that's basically what your stereo looks like mounted inside your glove box. You can move it over to one side or the other. That way you can still have room to get into your glove box. If you choose to leave your glove box in it, that would be if the glove box is big enough, or if your radio is shallow enough to take that. Or you could use it to set a media playing device, something in there that plays MP3s or something like that. But basically that's it. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below.